All right, let's dive into this whole community garden design thing.
Yeah.
We're looking at chapter 3 of Growing Together today, all about laying out the perfect garden space. And I'm excited to transform a blank canvas into a thriving community hub with you.
Yeah, it's really more than just, figuring out where to put the tomatoes. It's about creating like this whole sustainable ecosystem that brings people together and benefits the environment too.
Okay, I am intrigued already.
Yeah.
So the book starts with permaculture. I'll be honest, I've heard the term, but I don't really get what it actually means. Can you break it down for me?
Okay, so imagine like mimicking the efficiency and resilience of nature. One of the core concepts is this thing called zones and sector analysis.
Okay.
So think of your garden like in zones, concentric circles, radiating out from a central point. Zone 1 would be closest to your home or entrance, like the highest traffic area, for things you need to access quickly and frequently, like herbs or salad greens.
Makes sense. So things you're always grabbing. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So what about those outer zones then?
As you move outward, the zones transition to less intensive use. Zone 5, the furthest out, might even be a wild natural area, left largely undisturbed. It's all about minimizing effort and maximizing yield, just like nature does.
Oh, that's really cool. But what about sector analysis? Is that where the sun and wind and all that come in?
Exactly. You're understanding the forces that are impacting your garden from the outside. Wind, sun, water flow, even noise, and then you strategically position elements to harness the good and mitigate the bad. Like, say you've got a windbreak of trees to protect delicate crops, or maybe a swale to capture rainwater.
Oh, swales. We'll get to those in a bit. But first, site mapping. Is that literally like drawing a map of the space?
Yep. You got it. It's like creating a blueprint. You're thinking about the size and shape of the area, existing structures. And those sun and wind patterns we just talked about, once you have a clear picture, you can start mapping out your garden beds, pathways, seating areas, everything.
Okay, cool. Speaking of garden beds, the book seems to love raised beds. Why are those so popular, especially for community gardens?
Well, they offer some real advantages. First, they improve drainage, especially if you're dealing with heavy clay soil. Raised beds can be a lifesaver.
Okay, so no more soggy roots. I can see why that's important. Anything else?
Well, accessibility is huge. The elevated height means people with mobility issues can garden more comfortably without having to bend over as far. Plus, they just look nice, structured, like a series of mini gardens within the larger space.
I like that. And speaking of structure, the book talks about pathways.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's more than just creating walkways.
For sure. It's about flow and functionality, making them wide enough for wheelbarrows, accessible for everyone, and placing them strategically so you don't trample the plants. You can even get creative and line them with fragrant herbs or add benches for rest stops.
It's like designing a miniature park. I love it. And thinking about accessibility, the book even mentions like the height of those raised beds should cater to everyone's needs. It's all coming together now.
Yeah, you're thinking about flow different areas for different purposes. Maybe a central gathering space with benches, a designated tool shed, even a composting area. It's about creating a space that welcomes everyone and functions smoothly.
Okay, let's talk water management. I think a lot of us struggle with this. The book mentions swales and rain gardens. They sound fancy, but I have no idea what they are. What are they?
Okay, so think of swales as like shallow ditches that follow the natural contours of your land. They slow down rainwater runoff, allowing it to soak into the soil instead of just running off. This recharges groundwater, reduces erosion, and creates a more hydrated landscape.
Okay, I think I'm getting it. And rain gardens, are they similar?
Yeah, kinda. They're like intentional dips in the landscape.
Yeah.
Designed to collect rainwater. You plant them with native species that can handle both wet and dry conditions. It's a beautiful and functional way to manage water, while also adding visual interest to your garden.
So they're not just practical, they're pretty, too. I like that. What about those times when Mother Nature needs a little help, especially in drier climates?
Right, sometimes you need a little extra boost. Drip irrigation is a great option. It delivers water directly to the roots through a system of tubes, so you minimize water loss and even reduce weed growth.
Okay, that sounds efficient. What about soaker hoses?
Those can be good too. Soaker hoses slowly release water along their entire length, which is great for keeping those roots consistently moist. They're also pretty inexpensive and easy to install, making them a good choice for smaller areas.
This is making me rethink how I water my own garden. The book goes even further. Talking about gray water systems, that seems pretty innovative. What are those?
It's about seeing wastewater as a resource, not just waste. Gray water, which is the water from your sinks, showers, laundry, can be filtered and used to irrigate non-edible plants. So you reduce your reliance on fresh water.
This is blowing my mind. So we've covered permaculture, mapping out the space water management. But a community garden is more than just functionality, right? It should be a beautiful, welcoming place, too.
You're absolutely right. That's where the concept of balancing beauty and productivity comes in. We can dive into that next. Exploring how to create a space that's both functional and visually appealing.
I can't wait.
Okay, so let's talk about turning this functional space into something beautiful and inviting. I mean, it's not just about aesthetics, right? It's about creating a space that evokes certain feelings and encourages interaction.
Ooh. I like where this is going. Tell me more. What's the secret sauce here?
Well, the book talks about using things like color schemes and textures and focal points to make the garden visually appealing. It's like painting with plants.
I like
You
that.
could have like a cool-toned garden with silvery foliage and blue flowers.
Yeah.
Or maybe a warm-toned garden with fiery reds and oranges.
I've never thought of it like that. But it totally makes sense. Do you keep it from being like a chaotic mess of colors, though?
Yeah, that's where focal points come in, like maybe a majestic flowering tree in the center, or whimsical sculpture tucked away in a corner, or even like a beautifully designed compost bin. These elements draw the eye and add structure to the garden.
Okay, I'm picturing a gorgeous mosaic tiled compost bin right now. So we've got colors and focal points. What about texture? I've never really considered texture in a garden before.
Oh, texture is key for creating visual depth and interest. Think about the contrast between the smooth leaves of a hosta and the feathery fronds of a fern, or the rough bark of a tree against the delicate petals of a flower.
Okay, I'm getting inspired. This is making me want to grab my gardening gloves and get creative. But community gardens are about more than just looks right. They're social spaces, too.
Exactly. The book talks a lot about incorporating community spaces into the design. So you might have like a cozy seating area under a vine-covered pergola, perfect for sharing stories and a cup of tea, or a designated area for workshops and educational activities.
So it's about creating a space where people want to linger, connect with nature and with each other. What else can we do to encourage that social interaction?
Maybe a communal table for potlucks, a fire pit for gatherings on cool evenings, or even a children's play area to engage the youngest members of the community.
Oh, I love that. Speaking of children, the book mentions accessibility for people of all ages and abilities. How do we design with that in mind?
Well, a truly successful community garden. It needs to be inclusive and welcoming to everyone. That means making sure pathways are wide enough for wheelchairs and strollers, that raised beds are at a comfortable height for people who have difficulty bending, and that there are seating areas for people to rest and socialize.
So it's about removing barriers and creating a space that's accessible to all.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond just physical accessibility, right?
Well, absolutely. It's also about creating a welcoming and inclusive atmosphere for people from all backgrounds and cultures. So you might think about incorporating plants that have cultural significance to different groups, or designing spaces that reflect diverse aesthetic preferences.
It's incredible how a community garden can become a microcosm of the community itself, reflecting its diversity and values. But communities change over time, right? So how do we design for adaptability?
That's a great point. The book suggests using modular elements like movable raised beds or container gardens. So maybe you start with a small herb garden and later decide to add a fruit tree orchard. The possibilities are endless.
It's like playing with building blocks. But instead of blocks, we have plants and pathways and all sorts of amazing elements. And that brings us to the most important building block of all, the soil.
You got it. Next up, we'll dig into Chapter 4, which is all about understanding soil health and fertility. Get ready to get your hands dirty.
Okay, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into designing a community garden. We've covered permaculture, layout, water, even making the space beautiful. But it all comes down to the soil, right?
Absolutely. You can't have a thriving garden without healthy soil. It's the foundation of everything.
So true. So let's get our hands dirty. Chapter 4 is all about soil health.
Yeah.
And it mentions different soil types. I'm guessing knowing what kind of soil you have is pretty important.
Oh yeah, it's crucial. The book describes like 3 main types: sandy clay and loam. Each one has its own personality, you know? It affects the drainage, how well it holds nutrients, how easy it is to work with.
So for a community garden, what are we aiming for?
Loam is the ideal. It's got a good balance of sand, silt, and clay, gives it that nice crumbly texture. It holds moisture well, but also drains nicely, so your plants aren't drowning.
Makes sense. But what if we're not lucky enough to have that perfect loam? Can you actually improve existing soil?
Oh yeah, totally. The book gives us a ton of strategies. Adding organic matter is key. Things like compost-aged manure, even cover crops, which are plants grown specifically to improve soil health.
I've heard compost is like magic for the garden and what makes it so special.
It really is amazing. Compost is basically decomposed organic matter, like kitchen scraps, leaves, yard waste, all that good stuff. As it breaks down, it adds nutrients back to the soil, improves its structure, and feeds all those tiny microbes that are essential for healthy plants.
It's incredible how much those little guys matter. The book also mentions soil testing. Is that really necessary?
It's a good idea, especially when you're starting a new garden. A soil test tells you your soil's pH level, whether it's acidic or alkaline, and its nutrient content. Then you can adjust things accordingly, like you might add lime to raise the pH if it's too acidic, or use specific fertilizers based on what's missing.
So it's all about finding that perfect balance for optimal plant growth. But let's talk about pests and diseases for a minute. Dealing with those organically can be a bit intimidating.
I know what you mean, but the book has a whole section on organic pest and disease management. And you know the best defense is a good offense, meaning creating a healthy, diverse garden ecosystem.
Okay, I like that approach. How do we create that kind of environment?
Well, diversity is key. Planting a variety of species attracts beneficial insects that help keep pests in check, like ladybugs, they love to munch on aphids, or lacewings, they'll feast on spider mites. Companion planting is another great technique. Some plants, when grown together, naturally deter pests, or even enhance each other's growth.
So it's about working with nature, not against it. What are some other organic pest control methods we can use?
There are so many options. You can make your own insecticidal soaps, use neem oil, or even just physically remove the pests by hand. It's all about getting to know your garden and its inhabitants and finding solutions that work in harmony with nature.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive. I mean, from soil microbes to beneficial insects, it's amazing how interconnected everything is in the garden.
It really is. It's a whole symphony of life.
And it reminds us that gardening is about so much more than just producing food. It's about connecting with nature, fostering community, and creating a more sustainable future. So listeners, you're now equipped with the knowledge to not only design a thriving community garden, but to nurture its growth for years to come. Get out there, get your hands dirty, and watch your community bloom.